So we were talking to some of our industry contacts in the South. We've been looking at that as a leading indicator for how the U.S. is going to reopen and what kind of trends as consumers going to show after being, on its back for several months at this point. Up till now, we've been having to look for data points in places like China and Korea where the response can be very, very different. So we do want to look at these places. The one commonality is that these places are not New York or Boston even, which are much more crowded and dense locations. So there are still some differences, and we've heard some very, very widely different ranges of what's going on as these stores reopen. But I would say that in general, we're hearing some categories that got pushed to the side, like athletic apparel and footwear, doing very, very well. Nike seems to be a standout across several people that we've talked to in those stores, that it's come back a long way. A category that, when we were told that we were going to be working at home and that we were going to have, our kids weren't going to be at school and those kinds of things, that kind of forced the consumer's budget on them and said, I need to go buy things to, exercise at home. I need to buy things to entertain my kids and recreation at home. And so your budget got changed on you, and you had to buy those things. Now we're getting back to breathing and having a little bit of discretion over our budgets, and you're seeing some of these categories that have been put off for a little while come back very, very strong in these areas. I don't know that it means that the North and New York and Boston are going to react in the same way, those areas that have much more density where people might be taking social distancing a little bit more seriously for a little bit longer. But it was encouraging to see, nonetheless, after being on virtual lockdown for a while.
Michael, is this a pickup in stuff that had not done well online during the lockdown, or is it an incremental pickup in some of those areas? I mean, athleisure, for example, you would have expected to have been all right in recent months, even online.
I think it's incremental. I think, Lululemon is, like a good test case there. They had e-commerce sales up 41%, and in the last quarter, in the fourth quarter, they said, those trends had continued well into the first quarter at a very good clip, probably somewhere in the 30s. And, alongside the checks that I'm talking to you about today in some of these stores, women's categories in athletic have been the categories that have been lifting off very quickly in these stores that reopen. So it stands to reason that there's some categories with some brands, like Lulu, sounds like they probably were still doing pretty well through the store closures. They have a very good website to be able to deliver that experience at home. It seems like this is incremental for some of these guys. If your brand is strong and you're selling categories that people do need while they're at this period at home, and now we've got better control of our discretionary budgets, it seems like it's pretty incremental.
How do you square that data and this idea of pent-up demand for consumer discretionary products with an unemployment rate that was almost 15% in the month of April and possibly rising from there?
Yeah, it's a tough one to understand in full. I mean, you normally get some kind of an unleash of pent-up demand in these categories around this time of year, even if you just have something as simple as cold weather in April, and then we get out in late April, early May, and you see a big flurry of activity, and it can be short-lived, but obviously there's other dynamics going on here, so we don't want to take 1, 2, or 3 weeks of data and tell you here's a trend that we expect for the whole country. But, it was, as I said, it was encouraging to see. You also have to wonder, look, is some of the stimulus money that's making its way mostly to what is probably middle and lower income families? Well, a lot of the middle income families didn't lose their job and may not feel at that much risk. Perhaps they're saying, look, I'm feeling stable. We're generally looking like we're heading back to work. I can spend a couple dollars on myself to get a workout shirt or a pair of shoes.
And Michael, how have some of these stocks performed since the market bottom in March, and which is your top pick?
Yeah, so Nike's the one that's performed so well. It's up at $90 today. It went down into the 50s and before coming back here. It's come back a long way, but it's still, even with that dynamic, when you hear from retailers that this is the first thing out of the gate that the consumer is rushing back to, it really informs you that brand is still very, very strong. The product they're putting out is very, very strong. So we do still very much like Nike, very much like Lululemon, especially on the backs of the comments that women's categories are snapping back very well. Some of the ones that we find interesting as well, it'll be interesting to see how the beauty category comes back. We like Estee Lauder a lot. And then Ulta on the retail side, who sells the product, that's a category that women consume every day. And they've been working at home for a while. If there's a pantry load in apparel and we're going back out into the world for the first time, that's a category that we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on as one that could be catching up very quickly.
Yeah, not as many women as me have to put on makeup every day, Michael. But some of the trends you're talking about were the ones that were strong before the crisis: athletic apparel, beauty. Do you think anything is going to change as a result of the crisis, which could create new winners and losers in retail and consumer discretionary?
I do. We talked about this a little bit in the note you referenced earlier, but, we get asked a lot about what are some of the changes in consumer behavior that could be with us longer. If we all decide to work one day at home alone, because we spent 6 weeks working at home and we found out it was okay and we could do it and we were capable of doing it, well, that's one less day per week that you actually need makeup to go out to the office or something like that. That could be an important thing longer term. That could slow the frequency in a category like that. It could also be very positive for a longer-term trend of things like casualization of our apparel. We don't need suits and ties and workwear for women's if we're, at home working in our sweatpants and our Lululemon outfits more often. It could be a tailwind for categories like that.